Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this special reading and conversation with Ada Limón, the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States. My name is Bill Johnson Gonzalez, and I'm the director of the Center for Latino Research at DePaul. And before we get started, I just wanted to express some gratitude to all of the different people that collaborated to organize this event today. First, I want to give special thanks to Ionit Behar and the DePaul Art Museum. I want to encourage everyone to visit the show A Natural Turn, which features the work of 3 Latina artists, which is currently on display at the museum. I also want to thank the Visiting Authors Series in the DePaul English Department, as well as the DePaul Women's Center for their generous co-sponsorship and advertising of tonight's event. And finally, I also want to thank Sara Luz Torres, our assistant in the Center for Latino Research, who took care of a lot of the arrangements for this evening. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our very special guest, Ada Limón. Ada is the author of 6 books of poetry, including The Carrying, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. Her book, Bright Dead Things, was nominated for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. Her work has been supported most recently by a Guggenheim Fellowship. She grew up in Sonoma, California, and now lives in Lexington, Kentucky, where she writes, teaches remotely, and hosts the critically acclaimed poetry podcast, Slowdown. Her new book of poetry, The Hurting Kind, is out now from Milkweed Editions. And of course, recently she has been named the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States. Please welcome Ada Limón.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm just so honored to be a part of this evening. And I've had the opportunity to view the amazing exhibition, and the artists' pieces are just incredible. And so I actually thought I would begin with a piece that from Bright Dead Things, which actually is a ekphrastic poem. So it has it's responding to the cutout art pieces from Jose Davila. And so this is a piece I thought I'd start with. It's also from my grandfather, Francisco Carlos Limón. A trick of the light. Where do you keep your sharp tools of history? Shattered black spikes wedged in the rigid spine. What did the spikes hold up? Whose puny flag? When was the border just a line in the dirt? Whose dirt? Whose line? Where do the ghosts go when we refuse to spit out their clouds? It's true, he smudged oranges in Canoga Park and lived in a chicken coop. Yes, oranges. Now there are no oranges at all in the whole of San Fernando Valley. No oranges, just names of streets. Orange Boulevard, Orange County, the way we do, naming what's no longer there. Here was an orange grove. Here was a brown boy. I bow down in my suit of hand-me-down spikes into the coop where the warm fowl slept against him. The hens do not love him, neither do the oranges, but they survive together, fuel for the future. A picture of a feather without a bird, a picture of an orange without a tree, a picture of a shadow without a boy. And thank you. And I thought I would read another poem from Bright Dead Things, which is, I think of it as an apocalyptic love poem. And maybe it's time for an apocalyptic love poem. I came up with this poem after I felt like there was moments everyone always said, it's going to get better. Things are just going to get better. It's going to get better. And I had this moment where I was like, what if it doesn't? And then I tried to process how I would feel about that. And so this is that poem. The conditional. Say tomorrow doesn't come. Say the moon becomes an icy pit. Say the sweet gum tree is petrified. Say the sun's a foul black tire fire. Say the owl's eyes are pinpricks. Say the raccoon's a hot tar stain. Say the shirt's plastic ditch litter. Say the kitchen's a cow's corpse. Say we never get to see it. Bright future, stuck like a bum star, never coming close, never dazzling. Say we never meet her, never him. Say we spend our last moments staring at each other, hands knotted together, clutching the dog, watching the sky burn. Say it doesn't matter. Say that would be enough. Say you'd still want this. Us, alive, right here, feeling lucky. Thank you. After Bright Dead Things, I wrote the book The Carrying, which I know some of the students in the audience have read. And I want to acknowledge that I appreciate any time someone is teaching and studying my work. So thank you for that. And I thought I would start with a poem called Ancestors. And it's funny because I had just got in from DC last night, home from the Library of Congress. And today was sort of a busy day, but in the middle of it all, I decided to set up my ofrenda. And so I have my ofrenda in the next room, and it's got everything. And, you know, there's always that emotional part where you bring out all the photos and you put everyone out. And, you know, I have all my marigolds. And so I thought I would read this poem, Ancestors. I come here from the rocks, the bone-like chert, obsidian, lava rock. I've come here from the trees, chestnut, bay laurel, toyon, acacia, redwood, cedar, 1,000 oaks that bend with moss an old man's beard. I was born on a green couch on Carragher Road between the vineyards and the horse pasture. I don't remember what I first saw, the brick of light that unhinged me from the beginning. I don't remember my brother's face, my mother, my father. Later, I remember leaves, through car windows, through bedroom windows, through the classroom window, the way they shaded and patterned the ground. All that power from roots. Imagine you must survive without running. I've come from the lacing patterns of leaves. I do not know where else I belong. It's a tree poem, but it's an ancestor poem. And then I thought I would read this poem from my mother. And yeah, I'll just say this, that I have scoliosis. In fact, I just had a spine appointment today that was wonderful. And but I have to do a lot. For those of you who have it, it's common. A lot of making sure that I'm, you know, staying limber and staying well, so that my spine moves the way that it needs to move. And at one moment I had this thought, God, I've been doing this for a long time. And then I realized, no, it wasn't just me. So this is a poem for my mother. The Raincoat. When the doctor suggested surgery and a brace for all my youngest years, my parents scrambled to take me to massage therapy, deep tissue work, osteopathy, and soon my crooked spine unspooled a bit. I could breathe again and move more in a body unclouded by pain. My mom would tell me to sing songs to her the whole 45-minute drive to Middle Two Rock Road and 45 minutes back from physical therapy. She'd say that even my voice sounded unfettered by my spine afterward. So I sang and sang because I thought she liked it. I never asked her what she gave up to drive me, or how her day was before this chore. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spine appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song on the radio. And I saw Mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought, my whole life I've been under her raincoat, thinking it somehow a marvel that I never got wet. Someone asked me about that poem, and I thought, yeah, it really did. I did have that moment where it came to me. I saw the image, and there are moments where I think we think it has been us alone against the world, and it can feel that way. And then you start to think about how many people, whether they're friends, whether they're chosen family, sometimes they're not our actual family, whatever it is, those people that have just lightly nudged us in the right direction or helped us get to where we are. They're with us. I'm going to read a poem next. It's more of a spring poem, but it's a poem about a weed that I like to call a flower. Dandelion insomnia. The big ass bees are back, tipsy, sun-drunk, and heavy with thick knitted leg warmers of pollen. I was up all night again, so today's yellow hours seem strange and hallucinogenic. The neighborhood is lousy with mowers, crazy dogs, and people mending what winter ruined. What I can't get over is something simple, easy. How could a dandelion seedhead seemingly grow overnight? A neighbor mows the lawn and bam, the next morning, there's 100 dandelion seedheads, straight as arrows and proud as cats, high above any green blade of grass. It must bug some folks. A flower so tricky it can reproduce asexually, making perfect identical selves. Bam, another me. Bam, another me. I can't help it. I root for that persecuted rosette, so hyper in its own making, it seems to devour the land. Even its name, translated from the French dent de lion, means lion's tooth. It's vicious, made for a time that requires tenacity, a way of remaking the toughest self while everyone else is asleep. My husband is always giving me a hard time for liking dandelions and refusing poison on the lawn. And here's a poem that it's funny to say this out loud, but I was at the White House in late September, and I just was in the back because I wasn't supposed to be doing anything. I was just there as an invited guest for Hispanic Heritage Celebration. And as Dr. Biden got up there to speak, she suddenly started quoting my poem. And it was just really a remarkable moment. And I was so glad my husband was there because, of course, I was crying and looking around going, like, how is this even happening? That we're in this room and this is, I don't even need to do anything. I don't even need to perform. She's doing it for me. So I thought I would read this poem in honor of that experience and in honor of that room full of people from so many places. It was really inspirational. Dead stars. Out here, there's a bowing, even the trees are doing. Winter's icy hand at the back of all of us, black bark, slick yellow leaves, a kind of stillness that feels so mute, it's almost in another year. I am a hearth of spiders these days, a nest of trying. We point out the stars that make Orion as we take out the trash, the rolling containers, a song of suburban thunder. It's almost romantic as we adjust the waxy blue recycling bin until you say, man, we should really learn some new constellations. And it's true. We keep forgetting about Antlia, Centaurus, Draco, Lacerta, Hydra, Lyra, Lynx. But mostly, we're forgetting we're dead stars too. My mouth is full of dust, and I wish to reclaim the rising, to lean in to the spotlight of streetlight with you, toward what's larger within us, toward how we were born. Look, we are not unspectacular things. We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder? What if we stood up with our synapses in flesh and said no? No to the rising tides, stood for the many mute mouths of the sea, of the land? What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth? If we declared it a clean night, if we stopped being terrified, if we launched our demands into the sky, made ourselves so big people could point to us with the arrows they make in their minds, rolling their trash bins out, after all of this is over. Thank you. And I want to read this poem from my friend Echo, who's going through a hard time, and she's someone who has taught me so much. She is a park ranger at Yosemite, and when we were little, she was someone who very much taught me to look closely at things. What I want to remember. Right before General Vallejo's home, with its stately stone and yellow walls, there's a field along the footpath where spring rains bring the frogs, a whole symphony of them, breaking open the hours just before the sun sinks into the Pacific Ocean only an hour away. Why am I placing you here? I am on a plane going west, and all the humans are so loud it hurts the blood. But once I sat next to a path that was still warm from the day's heat, cross-legged with my friend named Echo, who taught me how to amplify the strange sounds the frogs made by cupping my ears. I need to hold this close within me when today's news is full of dead children, their faces opening their mouths for air that will not come. Once I was a child too, and my friend and I sat for maybe an hour, eyes adjusting to the night sky, cupping and uncupping our ears to hear the song the tenderest animals made. I always think about frogs. They're so vulnerable. See, I'm going to read this poem because I think it goes nice with the raincoat. As someone who has dealt with pain most of her life, there are moments where the world is trying to get you out of yourself, and this was one of them. Wonder Woman. Standing at the swell of the muddy Mississippi after the urgent care doctor had just said, well, sometimes shit happens, I fell fast and hard for New Orleans all over again. Pain pills swirled in the purse along with a spell for later. It's taken a while for me to admit I'm in a raging battle with my body. A spinal column 35 degrees bent, vertigo that comes and goes like a DC Comics villain nobody can kill. Invisible pain is both a blessing and a curse. You always look so happy, said a stranger once as I shifted to my good side, grinning. But that day, alone on the riverbank, brass blaring from the steamboat Natchez, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a girl, maybe half my age, dressed for no apparent reason, as Wonder Woman. She strutted by with all her strength and glory, invincible, eternal, and when I stood to clap, because who wouldn't have, she bowed and posed like she knew I needed a myth, a woman by a river, indestructible. When I was a kid, I remember the first moment when I found out that Linda Carter was Mexican. It was Latina. I got so excited. It still excites me. I'll probably just read 5 more poems if that kind of gives you an idea of where we're heading. And I'm going to read. It's funny. You always think you know where all your poems are. There it is. The poem that we were just talking about before I came on here, which is a poem that came to me. It was a gift from a tree. These are the things you get to say when you're a poet. This was a gift from a tree. Instructions on not giving up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crab apple tree. More than the neighbors' almost obscene display of cherry limbs, shoving their cotton candy colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains. It's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets, leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come, patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us, a return to the strange idea of continuous living, despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it, the tree seems to say, a new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. And then I'll read a few from my new book, The Hurting Kind. Just 4 more. And I think I'll start with a poem because I did just do my ofrenda. I think I want to start with this poem for my grandfather. And it's funny, it's one of those poems that came to me when I realized, you know the story, but then you don't know why it's important or why it's a poem. And suddenly it came to me and I realized, oh, it's because he was always an artist and didn't get the opportunity to be an artist. And there's so many of us who are first generation, second generation, third generation, who've watched that happen in our histories, where people have, in order to stay safe and secure in building a new life, have had to forego being an artist. So this is a poem for my grandfather. Heart on Fire. As a foster child, my grandfather learned not to get in trouble. Mexican and motherless, dead as she was from tuberculosis, he practiced words in a new language and kept his slender head down. When the other boys begged him to slip into the music shop's upper window to steal harmonicas for each of them, music being important, thievery being secondary, he refused. When the cops came to spot the boys who robbed the music store, they could easily find the ones spitting broken notes into the air, joyously mouthing the stainless steel, mimicking men on street corners, busking for coins. But not my grandfather. He knew not to risk it all for one stolen moment of exaltation. It's easy to imagine this is who I come from. A line of serious men who follow the rules. But might I add that later he was a dancer, a singer, an actor whose best roles ended up on the cutting room floor, a cut-up, a ham who liked a good story, who would have told you life was a series of warnings, but also magic. Once he was sent for a box of matches, and he put that box of Strike Anywhere in the pocket of his madras shirt and ran home. He ran so fast to be on time, to be good. And when he did so, the whole box ignited. So he was a boy running down the canyon road with what looked like a heart on fire. He'd laugh when he'd tell you this. A heart on fire, he'd say. So you'd remember. And then let's see. Let's just do 3 more. This is a poem. I'm thinking a lot about the incredible art that I got to see, and I'm thinking about these moments where the natural world offers you something, and I think this is one of those poems. Because I'm thinking a lot about being witnessed and being witness, those two things. Is it always that the artist is looking, but sometimes it's important what's looking back, right? That gaze. Sanctuary. Suppose it's easy to slip into another's green skin. Bury yourself in leaves and wait for a breaking open, a breaking out. I have before been tricked into believing I could be both an I and the world. The great I of the world is both gaze and gloss, to be swallowed by being seen, a dream, to be made whole by being not a witness, but witnessed. And then, because it's fall, I want to read this poem, this is the season, and maybe you have this too, but it's when I confuse, I can't tell what is a bird and what is a leaf, because everything's in the sky. It's the season I often mistake birds for leaves and leaves for birds. The tawny yellow mulberry leaves are always goldfinches, nibbling across the lawn like extreme elation. The last of the maroon crabapple ovates are song sparrows that tremble all at once. And today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows, which were actually field sparrows, flew up into the bare branches of the hackberry, and I almost collapsed. Leaves reattaching themselves to the tree, like a strong spell for reversal. What else did I expect? What good is accuracy amidst the perpetual scattering that unspools the world? And I'll just read 2 more. This is another poem about a tree, but it's also, I think, about the climate crisis. An aboutness of poems is always an interesting thing, aboutness. Salvage. On the top of Mount Pisgah, on the western slope of the Mayacamas, there's a madrone tree that's half burned from the fires, half alive from nature's need to propagate. One side of her is black ash, and her root is what looks like a cavity hollowed out by flame. On the other side, silvery green broadleaf shoots ascend toward the winter light, and her bark is crossed between a bay laurel horse and a chestnut horse, red and velvety, like the animal's neck she resembles. Staring at the tree for a long time now, I am reminded of the righteousness I had before the scorch of time. I miss who I was. I miss who we all were before we were this, half alive to the brightening sky, half dead already. I place my hand on the unscarred bark that is cool and unsullied, and because I cannot apologize to the tree, to my own self, I say, I am sorry. I am sorry I have been so reckless with your life. And I'll close with a poem about a mountain lion. This is comes from me watching those those wonderful night vision videos that can give you how animals move I love those. And so this is about that. The mountain lion. I watched the video clip over and over. Night vision cameras flickering her eyes an unholy green. The way she looked, the 6-foot fence up and down, like it was nothing but a speed bump, then cleared the man-made border in one impressive leap. A glance over the shoulder, an annoyance, and as if you could keep me out or keep me in. I don't know what it was that made me press replay and replay. Not fear, though I'd be terrified if I was face to face with her or heard her prowling in the night. It was just that I don't think I've ever made anything look so easy. Never looked behind me and grinned or grimaced because nothing could stop me. I like the idea of it, though. Felt like a dream you could will into being. See a fence? Jump it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ada, for that extraordinary reading and for sharing those wonderful poems with us.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
I'm so moved, and I'm so glad I also wrote my questions to you in advance, because I don't think I could come up with questions right now. I also want to say, before Billy, you ask your first question, also thank you everyone that is here and has been sending lots of love and great questions in the chat, and we'll be getting to some of those in just a few minutes.
To start off the conversation, as Ionit said, we did actually write out our questions in advance because we knew we'd be breathless after your reading. So I have a first question for you. In the carrying, you actually shared this poem with us this evening. You have that poem that says, I root for that persecuted rosette, so hyper in its own making, it seems to devour the land. So much of your book is about surviving and wanting to live, or maybe just persist.
Yeah.
But I was struck by the connection in this line between survival and self-making. I wondered if you could talk about that theme in your work. How does that creativity connect to survival in your work?
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful question, because as an artist that is I would love to be hopeful all the time, right? I would love to write hopeful poems. And yet I think that the thing that I lean more towards is just the continuing. That sometimes it's hard to have hope. It's always hard to have hope. But sometimes it's enough to just persist, to just keep going, to remember to recommit to the world and be like, that's huge. Look what I did. Look what I did. I got up, I got dressed, I showed up. Like, and I feel like so often we feel like we have to do these enormous things in order to have value, in order to see ourselves as successes. And I think that in my own work, I'm always giving myself permission to just let survival, persistence, continuing, reconnecting to the world, let that be enough. Let that be a life well made. And I think there's a sort of rebellion in me that is always like, we live in a world that is measured success by certain, things that you must accomplish. And I sometimes want to pull back from that and just go, look at this weed and look at this flower doing its thing and just going bam, 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 bam. And isn't that beautiful, right? There's something about that obsession and desire and just the need to continue. And I think sometimes that's enough. And I feel like we don't tell ourselves that we're enough. So I think that's a big part of my art making, but it's a big part of who I am as an artist in general, who I am as a human in general.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you.
I'll ask the next question. One of the things your poems make me feel, especially in The Hurting Kind, is a sense of togetherness, a sense of empathy. And I remember reading one of your poems one night and being really able to breathe better afterwards. A sense of, I'm not alone with this feeling. And I wanted to ask you, what is the process like for your writing? And are there any other poets or writers in general that also give you this feeling of togetherness?
Yeah. I think that's a big part of, thank you for that, by the way. That means a lot to me to hear, because I feel like oftentimes I am writing in isolation, like most art. It is, the actual art of making is oftentimes just me alone in a room. But of course, there's a community around that, and all of incredible people that amplify and lift you up and inspire you in that space. But when it comes down to it, it's just me and the pen, or fingers on the keyboard, whichever way I choose to write. And I think that a lot of times I am reminding myself that I am not alone. And I still remember a moment when I was on the New York City subway and my stepmother had just died about 3 months before. And I was really having a hard time with it. And in that sort of where you've gone through the initial grieving, but you can't get over the strangeness of absence. And I remember looking around on the subway and thinking, oh, everyone here has lost somebody. And I know that I should have had that experience before or thought that before, but it was a true thing. Like I really remember being like, oh, we are all going through this. And even if they haven't lost someone, they will lose someone, and then after that, we will lose ourselves. And it was this idea of like this sort of strangeness and surreality of death allowed me to relook at the world and that sense of connection, because it's true, we're all going through some of this. There are certain things that we will all go through regardless, and that immediately made me feel this kind of empathy for everybody. And maybe empathy is not the right word, but connection. And I think that's been a big part of my work, and also just when I'm feeling in a certain way, remembering some of those basic human events, reminds me once again to to show up, to show up in a real way in the world.
Thank you.
I have another question for you. Many of the poems that you've written are about defying the expectations that people have about various identities that you hold.
Yeah.
And I think that you're always writing about identity. Like in that last poem that you shared with us, I feel like it's really subtle. You're alluding to other things at the same time. So I wonder if you could talk about how you negotiate writing about, the specific identities that you have, and also what people bring to you and want you to, demand maybe that you be for them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I think that is very true. I think it's, all art seems to be a matter of permission at some moment. There's some moment where permission must be given, and you must give it to yourself. And I think that it can be hard when you want to explore all the different identities, whoever that is, on the page. And yet from both inside your community and outside your community, people will expect you to perform a particular identity. I know that happens for me as a Latina. I think that oftentimes people will say, well, you need to write more about your identity. In fact, I had that happen to me once it was actually in Chicago at a reading, and someone was like, where's your identity? It's not here. And it was really interesting, because I was like, well, no, it's all me. It's just not the identity you want. It's not the identity that you are the most comfortable with, or that you feel like And I think that was a big lesson for me in reminding myself again and again that I need to be myself wholly and fully on the page, whatever that looks like. And anytime I feel like I'm performing something for someone else, regardless of who the audience is, I will feel inauthentic, and I won't like what I'm making. So I always have to come back to the idea of like, okay, who is this person? And I am many, many things. I am many things. And and it means that sometimes I have hope, and sometimes I have rage, and sometimes I, want to talk about gender, and sometimes I'm like, yes, but let's embrace the masculine, and all of these things that I feel like people want to put us in a box. They want to say like, oh, you're Mexican. It's like, yeah, well, I'm also Irish. But there's these things that feel like they want you to be easy. And the greatest thing about art is that it's not easy, As C.D. Wright once said, the goal is not to make a story, but to experience the whole mess. And every time I come to the page, I think, okay, it's got to be the whole mess. It's got to be the whole mess, or it's not me.
Thanks. We love mess, so great.
I'm all for mess, and that's a great also way to ask you my next question, was just about the exhibition that we have now, and the 4 artists. They're all women from different parts of the Americas, also sort of exploring and presenting their identities in very different ways, especially in relationship to nature. And that looks very different in each one, right? It goes from, being focused on the artificiality, or sort of like these ideas of stereotypes with Joy de Minaya, and then other artists like Maria Berrio kind of focusing more as this nostalgic view of nature, of the natural. So I would love to ask you, Ada, if you could define what nature is for you and in your work. And has this definition or perception of nature changed throughout your different collections of poems?
Yeah, thank you for that. And first, let me say, I mean, the artists that are in this exhibition are just extraordinary. I was so moved by their pieces. And please pass that on to them, because I just was blown away. And I'll say this, that one of the things that moved me in particular was that I did think it was this constant interrogation of what nature is, and the way in which sometimes it can be used for us and against us. Like some people will say, right, with indigenous people, like, oh, you are nature, so therefore you're neutral. Or you're like, right, this level in which you have no power. Or we think of nature as something that we're in conflict with all the time, and we forget about the reciprocity. And I think there was a particular book for me that helped me, I want to say, understand again my relationship with nature. And that was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And that book really talks about the reciprocal relationship between the human animal and the rest of nature. And she has this quote that says, all flourishing is mutual. And I think about that so much. And I think that so often we believe we are so separate. And yet in reality, we absolutely are not. We adjust to the seasons. We notice everything. The tree, I believe, sees us on some level, notices us. It certainly notices what we do to the land around it, to the air around it. And so I think that for me, we are nature. I am nature. And the natural world is also me. And I think that it's doing a disservice to me or to a human being to not recognize that, because I think sometimes that separateness and that isolation and that feeling like you aren't connected can do us harm, because nature wants to heal and we want to heal, and we have to do it together.
So I think our last question is, and then we'll turn it to the questions we've been receiving. You have been called a phenomenological poet. In other words, your poems speak directly about our physical experience of being in the world. And you also said in an interview that, I'm quoting you, life should be less defined by doing and more by being. Can you please speak to this and your focus on the experiential and everyday life?
Yeah, thank you. I think that even as a child, I found life very strange, and that has never gone away. I find myself sort of in awe of little things, watching something and going, how is that possible? What is this? We're human beings that wear clothes. We're animals that wear clothes. That's weird. Like all these little things that to me we don't speak about that much, right? And then even when we lose someone, or when someone is, heartbroken or something, and we expect everyone to get past everything and move on and be strong. And it is this sort of idea that we have this clarity of purpose. And at the same time, I think when I think of clarity of purpose, I think, oh, it is to notice the world. It's to not miss it. And so much of our lives is defined by what's next, or what's in the past, what's in the past. And then we miss this. We miss this moment. I could be easily thinking, okay, after this, I go downstairs, I'll see my husband, or I could be here. And I think that that's a big part of a shift that happened, I think probably in 2010, when I started meditating more, maybe even before that. But when I lost my stepmother to cancer in 2010, I think a lot of my poetry shifted, because it became even more so about deeply noticing and paying attention and making sure that I did not take anything for granted, even if I wasn't writing about it, right? Even if I wasn't making art from it, but isn't like breathing enough, isn't being enough. And, it sounds silly, maybe that sounds like it's too naive, but I think watching someone die at, she was only 52, she didn't make it to 52. I think that you start to think, okay, well, what happened if that happened to me? You know, would I have lived enough? Would I have loved enough? Or would I have just, made money and went to work? So I think that shifted for me everything. And I recommitted to the world. I recommitted to making art, and I still want to make the most out of it. And so I think that's a big part of how I make poems, is that deep looking, and deep looking is a way of loving.
Absolutely. I want to select this question by Eliana Herman. And she's asking, Ada mentioned the image of the rain jacket sparking her realization about her mother. Mm-hmm. How many poems are sparked by a moment like that? And how else do your poems start out or come to you?
Yeah. Thank you for that. They come in all sorts of ways. I wish I could bottle it, because when it comes, it's such a it's such a unique experience. But I'll tell you, I was literally driving home. It started to pour, and I saw this mother do it without even thinking, taking her raincoat off and putting it over her kid's head like this, so the kid was like this. And together they were rushing down the street, and it was so tender. And it was also so, like, the mother didn't stop and think, oh, I will be wet, right? There was no moment. It was so instinctual. It just happened. And that image stuck in my head for a while. And then I knew that for me, that was the ending of the poem. It's very rare that an ending comes before the poem. So then I had to build the poem backwards. So that was a unique experience to me. Usually that's only happened with probably 2 or 3 other poems of mine. The rest begin usually with an image or a sound or an interrogation, question, something that's happening. And I start with the beginning and figure out where it's going. This was something where I knew where it was going to land, but I needed to get there and to show some of that work of what my mother did in order to get to that last image. But yeah, they come all sorts of ways. The only thing that doesn't ever work for me is just to have an idea. If it's a poem just about an idea, it has to have it's either sound or an image or something that's interesting to me, without it being, a concept.
Maybe speak a little more about the sound. There's someone also that asked, Abigail, they said you use a lot of beautiful internal rhyme in your poems. Mm-hmm. What are the sounds you think influence your poetic soundscape the most?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm obsessed with sound. And I can actually sometimes I have to pull back a little from it, because I can get so excited. I'm like, oh, I've just, been in an alliterative mess over here. And but I grew up writing poems, but also making music, and I was in a band for a long time, and I wrote lyrics. And I think that the musicality of language was one of the first things that drew me to poetry in general. And I always think about, they're very different, of course, because when you write a lyric, you also know it's going to be backed up by, at least one, if not more, instruments. And if you are working with a poem, you have to be all the instruments. And so I think that the sound work has always been the thing that's probably driven me the most to the page. And I hear it when I'm walking around in the world. Someone will mistake something or hear something. And I remember the saying, don't put the cart before the horse. And I accidentally said it, don't put the heart before the course. And that, of course, that became a poem. And so I think that there are also times where I'm just interested in language and how it came to be. In my book, Bright Dead Things, there's a poem called Downhearted. And I just keep thinking about the phrase downhearted and what does that mean, downhearted? And so I think that there's times where I'm also just like trying to piece together or unravel what are these strange human noises that we make, the strange way that we communicate. But yeah, sound is definitely probably the biggest driver for me in my own work.
Probably asked 2 more questions from the audience. So Destiny McElroy is asking, what do you see are the hallmarks of contemporary poetry?
It's so wonderful because I think contemporary poetry right now is so vibrant and alive. And when I was coming up, studying in my first poetry class, which was over 20 years ago, it was hard to find anyone with an accent over there. I would desperately look for people who had different sounding names from different places. I couldn't find any. I remember finding William Carlos Williams and being like, oh, Carlos, like I was so excited. And so I think that there's a certain extent now that anthologies and contemporary anthologies and, the new Best American Poetry, any of those anthologies that are coming out now are so extraordinarily rich with, let's put it this way, America's in the room now, and that was not how it was when I was first studying poetry. And I'm incredibly grateful for that because now I can point to all of these different influences and all of these things that I'm reading. But I think if we're talking, so beyond its sort of array of styles, voices, experiences, I also think that there's a level in which I think poetry really wants to connect. And I think that for a long time, poetry existed in the academic world. And it sort of existed as maybe an elite art form. And I think, I'm going back to like the Nuyorican and a spoken word and all of these movements that did so much work to remind us that poetry was in the streets, that poetry was in the bars, that poetry was spoken to lovers, that it was this real human thing. And it wasn't just something that existed inside of a book, inside of a classroom, inside of a school. And so I think that is a key element right now, is that I do think that the poetry being written right now wants to connect. I think that it wants community. It may not want a specific community, but I think it wants to connect, and it wants to go beyond the walls of the academic world, which I love.
Thank you so much, Ada. Okay, one last question, and this is from Mackenzie Collette. As a young poet who is still learning about poetry techniques, what kind of advice would you give someone who dreams of publishing their own poetry someday? Where would you suggest starting?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, keep going. That's wonderful. We need more poets. It's like making more flowers. I feel like one of the things that I would do is read widely. And by saying that is that if you have, 2 or 3 favorite poets, that's great, but then maybe find out who their favorite poets were. And then even go backwards. And because in doing that, you're going to get more and more inspiration, and you'll start to see, okay, maybe this is like the root of this person's interest, right? If you love Eduardo C. Carral's work, you could go back and look at you realize that he loved Robert Hayden, and then you read Robert Hayden again, or if you love Terrence Hayes, you would look at Wanda Coleman. All of these ways that you can kind of build your own access. It's like almost building your own anthology. So that's one thing I would do, is making sure that you read, far and wide. And also just, it's okay if you don't like a poem. I was someone who was obsessed with like, oh, if I didn't like it, there was something wrong with me. But we don't do that to music, just because you don't like a Neil Young song doesn't mean you won't like, a Jay-Z song, or if you don't like a Beyonce song, it doesn't mean you won't like Joni Mitchell. I mean, it's just, we don't do that with music. And yet with poetry, we think if you don't like one poem or two poems, you've given up on this whole genre. So I would make sure to go ahead and allow yourself to be like, this isn't working for me right now, because in 20 years, you might be like, oh, Rilke's the only person I want to read, so you don't know when it's going to happen. It just might not be available to you at that moment. So read as much as you can. And then the other thing I would say is that make sure that when you go to the page, that you're trying to explore something, that it's not something that you already know. You're not trying to tell us something that you have already figured out, but you have to let the poem tell you something back. At some point, the act of writing is the act of listening, and you start to receive something. But if you're always sort of going like, oh, this is what I know this is how it's gonna be, this is the story, this is the poem, it will always end up disappointing you. It has to show you something back. So sometimes you've got to sit and be patient and let it come, and you start, this is what it's telling me. It's not just about me being in control as the artist. It's about me also being receptive to what the universe is offering me back. So those are the few things I would say to that. I could probably talk more, but hopefully those will be helpful. And don't give up.
Thank you so much, Ada. I think we're going to be wrapping up. This was so generous and so moving. So grateful. Billy, also thank you so much to you and CLR for the support in this program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ada, for joining us.
This was wonderful. I think we're gonna wrap up, but thank you everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Wherever you are, thank you.